Welcome to the Lansdowne Public Library's Geek Out podcast, where we geek out about just about anything. I'm Jeff Miller.
And I'm Dave Cranefeld. Everyone's passionate about something, so we'll sit down with a variety of people to chat about their interests. There's so many hobbies, activities, and fandoms out there, it can be a little daunting for someone on the outside. So we'll geek out with our guests to get excited for something new, or something old, and hopefully make it a little more approachable.
Today we're talking with, quite a few members of the library staff, actually, about arguably the most important science fiction franchise there is, Star Trek.
So who we got here today? Does everyone want to introduce themselves?
Okay, I'll start. I'm Jean Thylacker, and I'm a real big Star Trek fan, so I'm looking forward to talking to other fans.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm the circulation manager at the library and also a huge Star Trek fan. I'm very excited to talk about this because it feels like I use every excuse I can to usually talk about Star Trek, just never in this setting, so thank you for having me.
And I'm Alex. I'm the programs manager, also a Star Trek fan, having grown up with it, big part of my life, so yeah, also enjoy talking about it.
All right, so I suppose, being that we have people from varying age groups who all probably started at a different place, let's just start with what first brought you into Star Trek?
Well, I'm the oldest, so I remember when the original series began, and I was not that interested at that time. I was 13. But as time went on and more my friends and family started to watch it, I started to really enjoy it, and now I really love it. So I don't know why, I just do.
Yeah, I remember watching it. Sometimes it would be on, like, the original series would be on TV. When I was younger, my dad would watch it, but I could never really get into it. And then I kind of was more of a Star Wars fan as a kid, then kind of a late teenager, early 20s was really into Doctor Who. But kind of after, like, that, I started, like, my boyfriend was really into watching it, as well as my family. So it just kind of, like, I'd enter rooms and it'd be on, and it would just kind of, like, start to stick with me where I'd get interested. And it really wasn't until, I kind of started watching episodes of Deep Space Nine that I suddenly got, like, sucked into it, like, to the point where I just really got serious about actually going back and watching them. I really love the original series movies and parts of the original series, Deep Space Nine and Voyager, like, just loved. So I just kind of, like, fell oddly and awkwardly into the middle, but it just seemed like the right thing to really just, like, spark my interest, so, and I'm still going through it.
My older brothers really enjoyed Star Trek, so when I grew up, I was exposed to it from very early age, so part of my very earliest childhood, the Next Generation was on the air, and then for the rest of it, Voyager was on. So I brought up with these as something that, is just something you're supposed to do, as a part of life is to watch Star Trek. And so it was...
I kind of love that, actually.
So it's just, Star Trek has always been, and I like it to always be, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's been around for the majority of us. It's been around pretty much for our entire lives. And whether we really, I think, were into it at the time or not, I think because it has such an impact that it's touched us in ways that sort of like a sleeper agent, later on, oh, that's what this was. And then kind of jumping off that cliff into it.
Yeah, I definitely, similarly, my parents watched it when I was young. They were watching Next Gen, so... I kind of followed along from there and then fell backwards into, the original series and all of that. It's kind of amazing how long that this sort of has just been... this is multi-generational for a lot of families.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And it is nice to always find some new part. Like, I'm currently rewatching Voyager. Like I said, I grew up with that, and yet there's still episodes that I somehow missed and that I'm rediscovering, and it's nice to always be able to come back to it.
I think when I was younger, and you could only watch one per week as they came on. So I didn't know anything about DS9 or Voyager, but then with the internet and now you can find them and binge them and watch them whenever you want.
Yeah.
It became so much fun to go back and connect a lot of these other shows with the stuff you're watching right now, as well as the original show.
Yeah.
And it becomes a whole universe that seems just chock full of new discoveries, unintended. And it's just always there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, like, another thing that finally hooked me was, like, I found the show that kind of, like, I sparked my interest that I actually wanted to continue, but then as you watch, they reference things from, like, the original series, and you're like, well, no, I need to go back and watch that, and then you fall into watching that and the Next Generation, and it's definitely, like, a good show for, like, you don't have to watch it all, but, like, it's very easily addicting, but you can also take your time with it because so much of it already is out there. Kind of difficult, I guess, if you're really serious about avoiding spoilers, but I feel like there's a lot of just, like, little things that are kind of neat, and there's no giant, like, I don't think, like, there's no, like, huge spoilers, I feel like, for Star Trek, that it's like, well, that's before this character dies, and, nothing like that is too intense. It's just, like, maybe little things that you'd be more satisfied with finding out on your own. I don't know, I feel like it's a very easy show to, like, if you are interested in any little bit of it, you'll carry on to other pieces, kind of like,
Because I think, too, that it, with any franchise that lasts this long, there's obviously going to be consistency errors and that sort of thing. But I think all of the shows have a great respect for what came before them. And so there is that interplay with them. And so there is this consistent world building. Yeah, there are retcons and that sort of stuff, but they do lead into each other. They do reference each other, and you get to see how things progress. So it is, I think, one of the most comprehensive expanded universes of a franchise that I'm aware of, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, when you consider this is, 11 shows, 13 films, 2 timelines, and more books than I can count, it's a very elaborate world that they've built.
Don't forget the multiple universes.
Yes.
As well.
Oh, yeah. Can't forget the goatee universe.
Goatee universe. The ones they don't want to go back to.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of that, what's everyone's the shows or the films? What's everyone's favorite? What's your standout series?
I mean, I kind of already touched on Deep Space Nine as my favorite, but Voyager it's so close, and I didn't think I'd like Voyager because I watched Deep Space Nine, was obsessed, loved it, was very mad that I had to move on, but Voyager also quickly has a huge place in my heart, so those are my favorite. But then also for movies, Voyage Home, I'm just I would actually say, if you want to just start randomly with Star Trek to just taste it, watch that movie. You don't need too much context, maybe a little, but I feel like that's a good mix of the serious, the really funny, and the really cool sci-fi that's just if you love that movie, you're just going to want to watch all Star Trek.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say because it always seems I like what I'm watching, but I will say DS9, Voyager. But the original show it's where it all began. It's sort of like my childhood. All those characters they're so ingrained in the culture. Mm. You might say Michael Burnham and most people wouldn't know who you're talking about. But if you say Captain Kirk, almost everybody, whether they watch it or not,
immediately
knows what you're talking about. So it's really hard for me. I love Next Generation. There's so much fun in that. And then all the new shows, I'm fascinated with. The cartoons are terrific.
I would second that. It might seem kind of weird with the cartoon shows, Lower Decks, Prodigy, and the original Hanna-Barbera spin-off of the original series, which I can't personally vouch for. I don't know if anyone else here can.
I have very vague memories of enjoying it as a kid. This was something that aired, I feel like, during that weird, before school started block on Cartoon Network.
This is
so
on.
I woke up early because my dad was usually up early, so I would just wait for school watching reruns of the weird Hanna-Barbera Star Trek.
I haven't seen it, but I would imagine, because I'm not a fan of all of the shows necessarily, but even the ones you don't like, you still enjoy just being in the world of Star Trek.
I think the one that sort of, I wouldn't say an outlier, but it's It's the only one that didn't go 7 seasons. Well, not the only original didn't either, but that seems like it went forever.
Yeah.
But Enterprise, which was the prequel to a lot of them, it doesn't get too much respect, but I wanted to watch it anyway, and by the end, I really thought they could have continued it because it started to get good. It was like 2 seasons, but then they started to grow a beard.
Yeah, I mean, that's I was going to say. That's
came into play. And
Should we explain?
Yeah,
we use Star Trek in jokes. I feel like
that probably needs a little context.
We should watch it. No explanation needed.
So in Next Generation, the first season I think is pretty
rough.
Yeah, a lot of people agree that it's not terrific, and
even the actors have apologized for it.
And there's a saying called when a show gets its beard, which is a reference to the fact that Jonathan Frakes, who plays Commander Riker, in the first series, he is clean-shaven, but by the second season, he has a beard, and that's approximately the time that the Next Generation
started getting good.
It is pretty great. Well, also, I would say the same thing is for Deep Space Nine. Benjamin Sisko is clean shaven the first season, and it's rough. Like, I think, that one's tough. But then once he gets, his beard, we are, set. He is, the best.
Once he moves the hair from the top of the head to the
right,
face.
That's right. He shaves, he's bald, but he's got this great, look. Love him. Another thing also, just because you brought up Enterprise, I'm actually currently watching that one. I'm, a little over halfway, and yeah, it gets a bad rap. I kind of wanted to skip it, honestly, to kind of get onto the new stuff, which I'm really eager to watch. But my husband, who's my Star Trek partner in crime, we watched them together, is very insistent that we stick to an order, which, to be fair, it's how you, stay on task. But Enterprise, it's got a lot of pros, honestly, and I do love it. I wouldn't start with Enterprise, honestly. I know it's the prequel, but I feel like the things that I appreciate about it are certain recurring actors or references to other shows that you wouldn't know until you watch it. But also, with Enterprise, it's kind of what illustrates, I think, the other reason I believe me and a lot of people love these Star Trek shows is Enterprise has sort of the weakest ensemble cast, whereas so many of the other ones we've mentioned, we kind of touched on it with, the Next Generation cast being so vocal about it, is they're also such a great group of playing their characters. And also they interact so well with fans, and they're really there's so much dimension that they bring to these shows that the seasons that don't have a great ensemble really are the weakest, I think, for that reason. And that's another reason I just feel like if you're looking for a show to hook you, there's so many good Star Treks with great characters that you just, you start to have favorites immediately, but even ones you don't like, the more you watch, you start to appreciate. There is so much, they really are like having friends, and I know that's really lame for me to say, but you get really sucked into them.
Like with all shows, there are websites where you can go to that will say which episodes you can skip. And it is nice, but it's also very varying from which website you go to because it's so character-based that most of the time when they say this is a bad episode, the reason they give is, it's about this character, and I don't like that character.
This episode focuses on Kira Norris.
Right.
See, I was going to say Q, because that's a big, there's a character, Q, that half the people hate him, half the people love him, and there's some people who will be like, I'm skipping it, it's a Q episode, but then there's people who are like, no, put it on.
Yeah.
You gotta watch Q episodes.
I feel like Star Trek has at least 2 faces. There's the face of, this is the future that is possible. This is the future of logic, but also compassion, of promise, of hope. And those episodes are great, but Star Trek is not Star Trek if you don't have Kirk wrestling with Spock over some bizarre mating ritual, or
called fanfare,
or an interdimensional being just being so happy that everyone got fed up with him, but pleaded his case that he gives everyone cigars and makes a mariachi band appear on the deck of the Enterprise. You need
a little of the goofiness,
exactly, and that's what Star Trek is. It's plenty of hard-hitting, good sci-fi. And then some fun.
Yeah, and I would say that to start at Star Trek, definitely go back to the older shows. Because the newer shows, I think that's what they lack. They lack the fun. they're more like, to me, they've become more Star Wars, where it's all about politics and technology, and they've yet to be real fun. But I'm hoping that that'll come now that a lot of them have settled their characters in place. But the older shows, they are great for that. And I think that's why the people love them and go to these conventions and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because they see these actors as that way. That they're going to be fun.
Yeah. And like Laura was saying, that they're friends. Because you see them with the highs and lows. You see them talking about philosophical and political things, but then you also see them goofing around with each other, and you can feel a part of that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I definitely have, even just a few episodes. I don't want to get into the details since we're just still in the shows, but, even in Voyager, there's episodes that I have a favorite character, and when, they do something that you disagree with or have to actually, kind of look into your own ethics and beliefs, Star Trek is so good for challenging that. And, the next episode, everyone, it's some weird aliens affected everyone, and then they're all Irish for some reason. It happens.
Yeah.
Holograms gone wild, but it really is such an interesting, it reflects life, and I think the point of the show is, it's the future that we want, but it's also not trying to sell a utopia. There are still things that people and other species have to work out, and they usually mirror, current events happening, whether at the time of the show. Honestly, I've been watching these episodes from the 90s, early 2000s, and they still are problems we're dealing with. I think even the 60s show tackles a lot of that. And that is, again, it's really a good, for the most part, again, not every episode's well written, but the ones that are, you are they sort of change you a little bit. And that's another reason people love this show, and it means so much to them, is it really, I think,
Yeah. I definitely think that, because again, like I said before, what started me on Star Trek was just kind of the family tradition, but I keep coming back because of how relatable the characters are, and the issues they deal with there are the political, there are the social, but there are also just the intrinsically human issues. My favorite character of all of them is Data, and just how he learns how to interact with people is one of his main character aspects. So it's just very... You can find a relatable character, some sort of relatable human issue that you can identify or be challenged by in any show.
I think Star Trek, that's another reason they've done a really good job of trying to make it as inclusive as they can, depending on where we've been in our social fabric at the time. The stories of Lieutenant Uhura, the first black character on TV, the kiss between Kirk.
That was a huge deal at the time.
It really was. And then Next Generation, suddenly now there's a female doctor. And although I must say, the one thing that they have yet to do in almost every show, somehow they dress the female characters, no matter how smart they are. Up until these Voyager, they're always dressed in some sexy outfit, which is hilarious to me.
Yeah. They had 7, but at least
9.
7 of 9.
Janeway was appropriately.
Right.
Yeah. Sure. Amusingly enough, of all of the captains, I would say Janeway is the only one I actually believed was behaving like a captain.
100%. I think she's actually I was talking about Cisco as my favorite, but Janeway might be my captain because I would just follow her anywhere.
Exactly. If I had to follow one of these people into the unknown, I'll go with Janeway. I trust her more than the others.
Yeah.
And I will say, though, with 7 and 9, because again, just speaking as character I saw from not knowing they were from Star Trek or anything, was, this sexy, beautiful woman, and that's just all I knew about this character because she's shown everywhere. She's kind of in a skin-tight leotard, for people who don't know. She is beautiful, to be fair, but when I got to the episodes with this character, I was blown away because this character is so complex and so interesting, and oh my goodness, Jerry Ryan acts so well in this role, but you don't know that because all they did was post this kind of character, so that is something that they... With a lot of shows, with Star Trek, they're so progressive in so many ways, and yet...
To their credit, Next Generation did try to put guys in long skirts, and I don't think that worked very long, and it also was never any of the main characters.
No, that would have worked better had it, like, in fairness, I was going to say imagine Riker wearing a skirt, but then I remembered how he sits, so...
that would be good.
But I know Jonathan Frakes done it, because
absolutely.
So cool.
Oh, yeah.
And that's actually another, there's sort of a long history of Star Trek being so on the cusp of being progressive with, like, LGBT issues and showing them on the show. A lot of the producers are actually very anti that, even though the writers and the actors were very open to it. And really, there's a few pretty iconic episodes in Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, I can't really think of any in Voyager. And I know in the new stuff they tackle this more directly, but there's some, like, really good subtle episodes that tackle some issues that, you didn't really see too much, especially with, like, trans awareness and, like, same-sex couples. Yeah, again, like, Star Trek, even when, like, it is trying to be progressive, like, they're fighting an uphill battle, it seems.
Well, that's the plight of Star Trek, I think, in a nutshell. But I think that's also sort of what Gene Roddenberry, the show's creator, was sort of going for at the time. Mm-hmm. I think since the beginning, it has been an uphill battle, but he wanted to create this show of a better future, and in doing so, has tackled things that no network, even with the branding of Star Trek, wants to show, for profitable reasons.
And to be fair, it is considered, like in television history alone, just one of the most important. Michelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura in the original series, I think she was considered quitting after season 1 because she just wasn't sure if this was, like, good for her career. Her mind was changed because she met Martin Luther King Jr., who said this is one of the best shows on TV, and it's, like, his favorite show because it was the only show to show a black woman in command in any role. And, like, that is, again, like, the future, like, and that was in the midst, of course, of, like, civil rights in the 60s, and, like, that is pretty, like, revolutionary that, is, like, kind of silly science fiction show. It's still, like, you think, oh, it's just whatever, but it's, like, representation matters so much, and I feel like Star Trek has always been ahead in that.
And it's also, like, it's inspired many things culturally and technologically, and not just socially, too, but, like, I mean, though we probably would have gotten touch screens and tablets and such independently, they were still shown in Star Trek first, and people who created those did reference them from time to time.
Yeah.
I wish I had $1 for everyone that had their first flip phone that said, "Beat me up, Scott."
Oh, yeah. I definitely did that.
My text message alert for a while was just the communicator sound effect.
To be fair, too, watching it, like, they kind of zoom with somebody in every episode. Like, there's an on-screen meeting. They have to, like, we're there, guys.
Just automatic doors, too. Whenever I go through an automatic door, and it's just like...
See, now that's a Star Wars one for me, because it's always
using the Force
to open the door.
I will do that sometimes too.
Well, speaking of Star Wars, where in terms of Star Trek versus Star Wars, Stargate, Battlestar, all of these other
all the stars,
Battle of the Network stars, all these science fiction centric franchises and universes. What sets Star Trek? Both your opinion, but also personally, what sets it apart from these different but somewhat similar franchises?
I mean, I feel like we've talked a lot about how it's a great balance of serious, like, thought-provoking, really silly. I think a lot of people, and this includes me as a kid, don't like Star Trek because it's, like, intellect over action, maybe. If you really like action, Star Wars, right? Because that's, like, a space opera. It's not so much... it's like a Han shot first, like, kind of describes it. It's like shoot first, think later. That's Star Wars. And I'm not saying that as a bad way, but if you kind of, maybe you get bored with, like, space battles, or you really, again, you like stories that are very character-driven, or just have, multiple characters, I think Star Trek just kind of serves a lot there, and it opens up a lot of possibilities with these stories, and there is action, actually. Like, again, I would recommend Deep Space Nine. By the time you get to kind of, like, the mid to final seasons, like, there's a lot of star battles, and they actually tackle war. So, I just feel like if you really like action, there's other sci-fi, and Star Trek still has some action, but that's more dialogue and talking heavy. So if you don't shy away from stories with a lot of talking, less showing, maybe.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I'd say it, too, there's kind of the stereotype of the Star Wars versus Star Trek. But I've never really encountered anybody who liked one and didn't like the other.
That's a good point.
You can like both because they are completely different. And to anybody to preemptively say is like, oh, well, in Star Wars they have great character development and so. Yes, there's the character aspect of Star Wars and the action aspect in Star Trek. But the other one does the other thing a lot better. And so, yeah, Star Trek, I would agree with Laura in that it's very, very character-driven, and you get to know the characters very well. And they explore, like you said before, aspects of humanity, what it is to be human, and the philosophical implications of that. And they do that in each of the shows, and they do it very well, I think. So it is definitely a lot more intellectual. Again, not to put Star Wars down, of course. I enjoy Star Wars quite a lot.
Yeah, I was just going to say, whereas Star Wars, I love it too. We watched all the stuff. Now I understand it totally.
Eventually we'll have to do a show on Star Wars.
Right. But
we could probably have most of the same guests.
Yeah.
The big difference, I would say, is what Alex and Laura said. It's just watching Discovery the other night, and this happens all the time in Star Trek, whereas you come to a climax, and in usually a Western or something, you would feel, boom, that's the end, and everybody feels good about it. But in Star Trek, there's usually somebody saying, I don't think you were right.
Mm-hmm.
and presenting another side of it. So there's always that questioning.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the perfect future?
Yeah.
How do we get there? Where do we decide these things? And that keeps me going.
That's such a good point, too, because I also think Star Wars, and it's not sci-fi, it's a little black and white. It's good. It's the dark side versus the good side.
Yeah.
A little on the nose.
Absolutely. But Star Trek is, like I was saying, there'll be a character that you love so much, and then there's an episode where they are so wrong about something, and, the characters have to work together. It's literally a crew, and they have to, sometimes be wrong. They have to be able to handle being wrong and to learn and to grow, and that's character development there.
Right.
So it kind of does mimic, again, you're talking about, it really does say a lot about being human, because life isn't black and white. It's a lot of shades of gray. And it just, there is something very relatable, whether it's mimicking a social issue or just kind of that's relatable. Just a bad day at work or having to get along with people when you're just not in a good mood. That's so Star Trek. And again, a lot of it is, I feel the trope that's big on Star Trek is this very found family, where it's a crew, and usually in the first season or the first couple episodes, they don't like each other too much, or they're thrown in this situation, whether it's on a space station, a starship, where, they're just having to work together and get to know each other, but by the end, they are the tightest group, and that's a trope that I absolutely love. Some of my favorite science fiction books are usually found family types, which happens a little bit in Star Wars, but I feel you don't get enough time with each group, because they're movies. Sometimes the shows, it might be different, but they're very episodic in that way, whereas Star Trek is very episodic for plot, but the characters continue to grow with you.
And two, I'd like to build on that, where it's not only do the characters interact differently, but they don't always agree, and they don't always finish the whole series agreeing. Yeah. There are characters who sometimes never are able to reconcile a specific philosophical or moral choice with another character. It lasts beyond just a specific episode or season's finale. Sometimes it lasts the whole series, where characters are just at odds with each other, and they have to learn to completely disagree with somebody and still work with that person. So it's not everybody in the end is all in agreement and is cheering their victory. There's more nuance with that.
I mean, you're literally describing my two favorite characters, Quark and Odo. It's by design they are at odds. But it is always interesting to have that sort of moral gray that you can deal with. One of the things I will always remember, specifically with Voyager. Voyager, they're literally trapped in another quadrant of the universe. They don't really have anything to rely on but themselves. And some of the decisions they made are very bad, honestly. Some more than others. A fairly famous one would be Tuvix, if I remember correctly.
Oh,
yeah,
Tuvix.
There's
someone had to say it.
There are entire forums dedicated to arguing the moral of that story, and
I'm just gonna say, and folks at home, please let me know when you get to this episode. But Janeway did nothing wrong. Just putting that out there.
I kind of disagree.
I agree with Laura on this.
I'm a firm believer that there probably has to have been a third option somewhere. But,
well, that's a good point, Jeff.
Right.
With Star Trek, the reality is always there, whereas there always seems to be a third option, especially in Doctor Who. Or,
there's a better solution pops up.
They seem to have to live with.
Yeah, sometimes you just live with the bad decision you've made.
Right. And even if you're convinced that a decision somebody made in the show is right or wrong, that is what opens the door for these types of discussions, where you can now have very interesting philosophical and moral discussions with other people, all revolving around, a silly transporter incident.
There's a
it was a very serious transporter incident, but okay.
Right.
You know what? Just for the sake of argument here, I do want to ask, would you use a teleporter, knowing how often these things do happen?
Oh, this is such a good question.
Well, so does it happen often? Because think about how many times it happens across every show.
Statistically, this is like less than 1%, actually. But when these things go wrong, they go really wrong.
Really wrong, but I'd say the statistics are probably safer than a car.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I need to
true.
see this versus, is it safer to fly on a plane than use a transporter? Because I love the idea of not even using transporters in space, of just we're going to go to Australia for the weekend, and you're just going to have a transporter.
Yeah,
that's so cool. You could, go someplace, different country just for dinner and come right back.
Yep.
That is the life. So, I feel like, yes, but I'm not saying I'm 100% comfortable.
Yeah. It's things like that really make Lower Decks one of my favorite series, because what Lower Decks does is, because we talked about how, Gene, you mentioned that the newer series are very sort of serious and serialized. Lower Decks, which is an animated sort of adult Star Trek show, takes a lot of the Star Trek themes and ideas, but makes fun of them but makes fun with them. There is a whole thing about transporter clones that happens. It's really funny because there's this whole build-up, this whole episode, this character is doing a lot of great things, and then this transporter mishap happens, and then almost like the entire thing, this person's whole thing is derailed. And it's hilarious because it's taking this idea of, you can go from Tuvix of this is a whole moral problem to, this thing happened. And that's how the character's treated in the show. Not another one of these. It's happened before. It's funny. They're having fun with it.
That's one of my favorite Futuramas, which also makes a lot of jokes about Star Trek in a very loving way. They've got a whole episode with the original cast in it, which is one of my favorites. But there's literally a scene where they're on a ship where the holograms all come to life, and they're like, this again? Because, in every Star Trek with a holodeck, it's going to happen at least once a season.
If I remember right, the exact line is, evil Link in his back.
Professor Moriarty.
I guess part of the love of Star Trek, too, is all these things. I mean, it sounds... It's so disjointed, but it's so nuanced. You get used to the fact that transporters, which is, I don't think is in any other series except for maybe Doctor Who.
Well, I mean, even Doctor Who, it's more.
Yeah, they have to land.
Yeah,
not as easy.
But it's taken for granted in Star Trek. It's just one of those things, and there's a million things like that. The holodecks and the certain aliens. And
you can tell that obviously there's variance from show to show, but you can tell that a lot of the writers thought about this. It's not science fiction in the sense where you just what would be cool necessarily, like laser swords. Again, not to put Star Wars down, but they're thinking about what would be an invention that would naturally come about, and then what would be the ramifications of that. And they're definitely very thoughtful in that. One of this simple thing, but one of the things I really like in it is the warp drive. Just when they show it happen, it shows the ship stretch out.
Yes.
And it's because they're talking about space and they're warping space, so it's traveling across this warped area, so it looks warped. So just the thought that they're trying to make it scientific, and I know that was a very rushed explanation, but...
It's a little hard to, if you haven't seen what's being discussed, I'm sure that's a little hard to visualize. But as somebody who's watched all of it, I'm like, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. It's fantastic every time.
In an audio format, it is really difficult to do a paper explanation.
Yeah.
Taking the two tips.
But, yes.
But I mean, we do see, like, that's such a, even, like, Star Wars does warp, but I feel like Star Trek did it first.
Yeah, and they look very different.
Yeah, and again, how hyperdrives work, there's no actual science behind it. And I know warp drives are still science fiction, but they do pay attention to the science part of it.
That's true.
That there's a specific thing they are said to do.
Right.
And to be fair, though, I think another good thing about Star Trek, because another reason as a kid I didn't think I liked it, was I just assumed it was over my head. And I think a lot of people do, and like we kind of maybe build it up with saying, oh, it's about intellect over action. But honestly, when I actually started watching it, it wasn't hard to follow at all. Like, yeah, there's a lot of lore to it, but there's not that much. I actually think Star
including
Wars,
lore,
there is a lore, yes.
I very much like.
To be fair, I actually think modern day Star Wars, where it is more confusing to me than Star Trek. I can easily, even for the Star Trek I haven't seen, I can figure it out, or like know, like, okay, that'll all fill in. It's not that complicated, and I think a lot of people just sort of write it off like, oh, that's over my head, I'm not smart enough, or I'll get bored easily. But I actually think one of the reasons you should give it a chance and try maybe not starting at the beginning, but pick a season that just appeals to you, is you'd be surprised, like, they tackle so much more, and yeah, there's a lot of actual, like, science-inspired details, which are really great, but, you know, it's not like you have to be, like, a scientist to love it.
Those details are there for you to enjoy if you want to, but they're not bogging down the show. Like we've been saying, it is first and foremost about people and about human issues, and so that's why it's so easy to understand and to relate. And they do explain the technical stuff very well. But again, that's not the forefront. That is there for those who like it, and I do like it, but it's not dominating.
Yeah, there's a little bit for, I think, every interest in this, honestly.
Yeah.
So Star Trek, obviously, we've mentioned it over and over again. It's just such an impact culturally. But what do you think is sort of the pinnacle of that? What do you think is the most impactful parts of Star Trek?
As, like, in pop culture, or overall?
In either.
I would have to say the most impactful is its inclusivity, not just of certain groups, but including almost anyone can watch Star Trek and find a reflection of themselves, whether it's an alien, but for some reason that is like you, or whether it's, something obvious like a woman captain, but it's always there. I mean, there's always a character that you think, yeah, that I know that person. I know, and I read a lot about how autistic kids, just Data was like so great for them. They really latched on to that. Nobody thought about it, but there's such a universe of characters that cover all kinds of personalities, and that it's just, you're going to see yourself somewhere. I mean, Tilly and Discovery is overweight, redhead, and you never see that on TV, and she's brilliant. So it's just, there's always something there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so much of it just, like, you probably know, honestly, like, even if you've never seen an episode of Star Trek, you can recognize things from it. We literally have an emoji that is the Vulcan live long and prosper hand gesture, which we've seen that so many places. There's so many, like, I think I'm super sensitive to it now because I'm such a fan, where I, like, laugh way harder than I should when, like, random movies just reference a little bit of Star Trek. But, like, it happens a lot because it's just such a big deal. And I feel like the original series, most people know because, Kirk and Spock, they're just some of the characters, like, that you can just say, like, Harry Potter or Gandalf. People just know who that is without knowing much about where they come from, or if they've never seen a movie or read the books. They're just such a huge part of, like, our modern lexicon, honestly. Yeah. I don't know, it's hard to say, like, what's, like, the most influential. It's a part of our culture.
Is very much. And a lot of it, too, kind of tying those 2 points together, is what the characters represent. Obviously, James D. Kirk doesn't always represent the core of what Star Trek is in terms of the ideals that they're striving for.
He's complicated.
He's complicated. I'm not saying he's a bad character. I'm saying that the public perception of him might not be the most representative, but there is the inclusivity of every type of person is there, and every type of mentality too. Like, so there are, again, it varies from season to show and episode too, but like, they encounter alien races that have morals, religions, political systems that they strongly, or at the very core of them, disagree with. And yes, there are episodes where they don't react in a positive way to that, and, they don't respect that other culture. But for the majority of it, they are like, well, that's their beliefs. When we respect those beliefs, we can see that we don't agree, but we can still coexist, and we can let them do how they want to.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Sometimes, yeah.
I mean, that is kind of one of my personal favorite things about Star Trek is, like, you start with the original series, and we're in the middle of the Cold War when that's coming out, and they have a Russian crew member. Yeah, sure, his accent is atrocious, but the point was the same.
Yeah.
But with basically each subsequent series, like, we start off basically at war with the Klingons, but by the time of Next Generation, we have Worf on the crew.
Right.
Best character, by the way.
Each, 7 of 9 is our first inclusion of the Borg, who were, the big bad in Next Generation. Each race that we've met, they may have started as enemies, but eventually, we are welcoming enough to everyone in that society that, these become
Romulans.
Yeah. The Romulans.
Cardassians are very interesting.
Very unique species, but even then, you have Simple Garrick, who's best tailor on the station.
There are many best characters.
There's a lot of best characters.
Oh, the Doctor.
Some of them. I'm not a huge fan of the Doctor of the Next Generation. I wish I liked them more. I just don't feel like they do enough. I feel it's a little mean, but my favorite Doctor is the hologram.
The Doctor.
Yeah,
perfect.
The Doctor.
The Doctor is
not to be confused with
not Doctor Who.
Yeah,
that was actually because I grew up with Star Trek. When I met Doctor Who fans and they were talking about the Doctor, I'm like, oh yes, I love the Doctor. But we were not speaking the same language.
When you say, who's your favorite Doctor? It's like, oh, none of these guys.
Yeah.
This guy.
EMH. What?
Yep.
I actually think it's really neat because exactly what you guys are describing, that's even mirrored in Prodigy, which is the Star Trek show on Nickelodeon aimed at a much younger audience. It's also animated, but the crew are a bunch of kids, essentially. But it's so Star Trek because exactly what we've been talking about here is reflected in that. Nothing is simple. Everything has multiple sides to be looked at. And there's even an entire episode revolving around the Kobayashi Maru, which is an impossible situation that is given to Star Trek cadets, or the Federation cadets to see how they'll deal in a situation that has no
good outcome.
No good outcome.
And that's also, like, another phrase that I see that in so many other pieces of culture where, like, something is described as a Kobayashi Maru because it's a no-win situation and it's how you're going to deal with it.
It was a phrase I had heard before I knew it was from Star Trek.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that those ideals, while they're core to Star Trek, I think we can all agree that, that's what makes it great.
Yeah. There's so much there, and I feel like I want to stress mostly to people who are sort of interested, don't be intimidated by it, because we're describing a show that has, like Jeff listed, a number of, media, but it's been on for 50 plus years.
Right.
Don't worry. It is so cool.
The cool factor is very high.
And I'm sorry.
Cool-looking ships.
Very cool.
The bird of prey. I mean, anybody who ever sees my Christmas tree will understand, because all of those ships are on that tree.
I was very annoyed. I couldn't find the Star Trek badge as a tree topper. And I'm like, why is that not a thing?
I've seen Enterprises.
I've seen I have one of the Enterprises. I also have a Death Star.
Okay.
Of all
That was
things,
at Christmas too.
I have a few, those have been done a few times.
Wow.
And I think that's part of it. It's always cool, no matter whether you from the 60s or now. It looks, when you are watching it, it's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, they take great pains to make it fun and very science fiction-y. And that's just fun.
And I do think, like, it is, like, a lot of people, it's portrayed as, like, the most nerdy thing. Like, you're a total nerd if you've, like, you know, are into Star Trek. But then, like, you start to watch Star Trek and you're like, I could buy a uniform. Yeah, I kind of want to invest in this. Like, you know, or not.
Backlit on my wall over my mantle.
Nice.
You will get addicted.
Yeah. And you can start really with any show. It's not like, oh, well, watch this show first. Or, I mean, I know, Gene, you said maybe not start with Enterprise. But for the most part, you know, you start with whatever show seems interesting and you can pick it up and they branch out, like you were saying, Laura.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say if you were a young person now, you know, teens, early 20s, definitely watch the new shows because that's going to be what you're used to seeing.
Right.
It's like
made for the current generation. Yeah.
But you're going to want to know things, so then you're going to want to go back and see the other stuff, and you'll have an appreciation for it.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I feel like we're kind of making fun of the Hanna-Barbera animation, and it's sort of the same thing with some of the original, and even Next Generation, and some of the 90s shows. There are episodes you'll be like, ooh, that effect did not age well. It might have been great at the time. And then the hairstyles for each show reflect the time they're made, and guess what? They're gonna time travel to, like, the 90s. Oh, really? Because it's not when the show was made, right?
Yeah.
So, like, there's definitely, like, I think a comfort if you watch kind of what you know. Again, if you grew up in the 90s and you love that kind of TV, Deep Space Nine or Voyager might be excellent for you, because, like, there's just a lot of references to just, you know, it's definitely a product of its time. Still, I think they all transcend that a bit, but yeah, if you're just trying to find the hook, watch something that you know rather than try to, like, if you just don't like old television, you might not want to start with the original series if you're just going to be laughing at the hairstyles. And you can still laugh at the hairstyles and enjoy the episodes, but maybe build up to that.
What about the movies?
Oh, yeah, I feel like we barely touched on those.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, like, the ones that start coming out, like, 2000s.
Well, I mean, there's the alternate timeline, but, like, even, you know, there was, 13 altogether?
Yeah.
So, well, but what's the rule that, to me, kind of holds true is, for the original movies, the odd numbers are all terrible, but the even numbers are great.
Yeah.
That, so far, from what I've seen, holds true.
So, I actually haven't seen any of the movies with the original cast, but I've seen the ones with the Next Generation cast, and then the new movies as well. And even the ones that people say is like, oh, well, these, like you were saying, the odd movie one. And, like Nemesis, I love Nemesis. I love all of these movies. And yeah, there are obviously ones that are better than others. I think First Contact's probably the best one. But the good thing about this is that they are different genres too. Like First Contact dabbles in horror, whereas you get Nemesis is much more action-oriented. I don't remember the names of the other ones, but they have different focuses, so you can usually find a few that you like.
And I'm just thinking how much I kind of want to see more horror-focused Star Trek.
There are some creepy episodes.
There are. It's not heavily utilized, but like thinking back, I'm like, you know, I generally liked all of the times they've tried to do horror.
There's a genre for every episode. They've done some horror, and I would love to see more. But even going back, there's some that are just straight up comedies. There's some that I'm pretty sure there are some musical moments.
Well,
I mean,
Q is around.
Yeah, and at the very least, one scene with the Doctor.
Well, because he's an opera singer in real life, so like they, you know, and you can actually tell. Oh, even Beverly Crusher, the Doctor on Next Generation, she's a professional dancer. If you know the movie Labyrinth, she choreographed that. So there's some episodes where
really,
what?
Oh, I didn't know that.
When you're watching David Bowie dance, Bev Crusher.
Oh man.
So again, if
you could say that he was crushing it.
Yes.
Sure.
But there's even episodes where you can tell, like, the actors had, like, some other skills and they utilized them, which is really cute, honestly. But yeah, there's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, the movies definitely also kind of tackle different genres. The Voyage Home, like I said, that one's really funny and really cute and really sweet in a way. So that's just one that I feel like is a great, you know, whether you've watched a lot of Star Trek, you're probably going to love it just because it's kind of like a warm hug. But if you don't really know it too well, you might just have your interest piqued because you're going to see how well these casts work together, and it definitely sets a tone for future Star Treks.
But just an idea of how wide the range of episodes and their genres. You know, yeah, they have the horror stuff, and then they also have an episode that's based off of Beowulf. So, you know, they go all over the place.
Yeah.
There's a Deep Space Nine that's pretty much the plot of Casablanca. So, like, yeah.
Yes, there is. And it was fantastic.
But also just to kind of touch on, to be fair, if maybe you've only seen the modern movies with Chris Pine, Simon Pegg, those actors, I do think they get a little bit of the essence. Like, if you like the characters in that, I feel like it only gets better if you watch the shows. I think the strong points with those movies were, I can't really remember the plots too well, but I do remember, like, the actors were, I think, mimicking, like, the cast did seem pretty tight, especially in the later two, I think, not so much the first one. But, like, as they go on, you definitely can tell, like, they were understanding that people love these characters, and you have to do the characters right.
And Carl Urban was great.
Perfect as Bones.
Yes.
Like,
he's absolutely fantastic.
I love DeForest Kelly, but honestly, like, Carl Urban, I could sub him in, and I'd be like, he's got it.
Yeah.
Simon Pegg's a great Scotty. Yeah, there's definitely, like, a lot of love that, you know, I think they at least paid attention to acting-wise, which, you know, a lot of, like, younger fans, like, draw fan art of, like, the newer Kirk and Spock, and a lot of stuff, which is like, yeah, because there's just a good chemistry there. So I feel like if you do like that, but you're not sure if you're going to like the older stuff, I think you might be surprised, because I think that is there too.
The only thing I remember from those movies is the bit where they ram into a bunch of drones with the Enterprise, but they have, like, shields at max, and they're just blasting Beastie Boys. I don't remember, but that scene is hype as...
The classical music joke.
That's what it was.
But to be fair, the Beastie Boys were huge Trekkies. If you watch some of their music videos, they're dressed as Kirk and Spock doing their fight. There's a lyric that I can't say on this podcast, but they reference Klingons, and I'm just saying, like, if you love Beastie Boys, like, do them a favor, like, watch some Star Trek.
I think one last thing I'd like to mention, the themes for Star Trek, the musical themes, are just beautiful. They definitely are part of the culture. They're some of the greatest, with maybe the exception of Enterprise. the greatest.
It's an outlier and should not be counted.
If you know, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things you hear it, and over the years, none of those themes have become old.
No.
From the very first
even the original.
They're just good music.
Voyager, I think, is the most beautiful, like, theme song. It's, like, gorgeous.
It is. It's really
nice. How many times can you guys say that you've skipped the intro?
You can't. Well, just Enterprise.
Yeah.
And you know what? I went in there because I, like, know the lyrics to that opening. That's another spoiler. They actually have lyrics, but, like, Enterprise was being
Enterprise
itself.
is its own animal, kind of, in a lot of ways.
Trying something different.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the good things, though, about Star Trek, is that they're not afraid to try new and different things. It doesn't work all the time,
honestly.
but sometimes it does.
Yeah, it's always important to innovate.
And there are some great parts of Enterprise. Like, don't get me wrong, I think
great stories.
Scott Bakula's a great captain. Some of the characters are really fun.
And the fact that show was made during the 9/11 time, part of the last two seasons is directly, influenced by
100%.
that. And it's kind of one of the characters. It sort of expresses a lot how we all felt at that time. So
yes,
even just for that, the show is worth it.
Yeah. And like, again, like, there's so much, I've always thought if I ever were to have kids, like, not like you can start babies on Star Trek. They have yet to make an
I was started pretty young.
You guys, that's true. Your experiences are different. But just like if you want your kids to kind of like be able to access certain tough issues, sometimes watching some of these episodes, like, and having a discussion about them, like, or even just teaching a history class, like, I feel like so many of these can be shown to, like, they mirror, like, things that were going on that are horrible, or even just, like, there's a Voyager episode that definitely tackles, like, rape in a way that it's not very obvious, but as you're watching it, kind of, like, just, it becomes clear, and there's a lot there to just about, like, victims and trauma, and just, it's so interesting, and yet it tackles, like, really tough subjects in, I think, very accessible stories. But, like, it's something, like, it's good to discuss with friends, kind of like we are, but, like, I would definitely use it for even teaching people, honestly, about things. In Deep Space Nine, a lot of, like, the Kardashian and Bajoran conflict is very much, like, things that were happening in World War II and in other, like, wars that are very dark, but they tackle it really well.
They're not afraid to go to any topic, which is good, because they go to the topics respectfully. So obviously, I'm sure you can find an exception to any of that. But
oh yeah, I'm sure, especially if you go to the original series, some things were not handled particularly well.
He doesn't punch a lot of women, which I'm not like thrilled with.
I mean,
but we're getting there. Triple it.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. They're kind of an environmental hazard.
They are.
They are.
We're there.
The Klingon Empire, they are a threat, and they are traumatized to this day about
They're kind of our lantern flies, I guess.
Yeah. That's the thing is, I'm curious how much of that actually was to do with the hares that they had released in Australia that basically decimated the landscape.
Was that around that time?
I do not know. I'd have to actually look that up.
Invasive species.
Yeah.
That's literally like how one of my classes taught invasive species was they used the Tribble as an example.
The Tribble
It's like,
episode. Yes.
There's even a problem in the online video game, because if you have a Tribble just on your person, if you have any like consumable items as well, over time they will replicate. They will remove an item from your thing and put another Tribble, and you can just end up with nothing but Tribbles.
Even the funny episodes turn out to be pretty deep.
Well, thank you all for coming in. This has been fantastic. In fairness, any excuse to talk about Star Trek, in my opinion, is well worth the effort.
Yeah.
I concur.
Yeah.
Please come to the library, and I mean, we can't talk all day about Star Trek, but I'll show you where the books are, and you know, we also have movies. We have some movies and seasons.
We can talk a little bit about Star Trek at least.
Just tell me when you get to the Salamander episode of Voyager, and we'll discuss.
That is one worth discussing.
Yeah.
Or about the Crusher Ghost episode.
Oh, I don't know if that one's worth discussing, but it is a weird one.
You know, come find us when you do.
Well, once again, thanks to all of our guests here for talking, just geeking out about Star Trek today. And thank you, dear listeners, for listening in. Hear what we're geeking about. If you'd like to geek out with us sometime, just email us at lansdown@delcolibraries.org. But that's all for now, so until next time.
Thank you for having us.
Yep, thanks for having us.
I guess, in this case at least, live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
To boldly go.